They thought they could steal my 3,000-5-100-acre farm through an illegal HOA foreclosure. Big mistake. What they didn't know. I'm a real estate attorney who just discovered their entire neighborhood was built on my property with forged documents. Watch what happens when I legally foreclose on every single house in their HOA. This is the most insane property revenge story you'll ever hear, and I have all the receipts. Stay until the end to see how this nuclear revenge plays out.
Welcome.
Back to Neighbor Wars HQ, where we bring you the most unbelievable neighborhood conflict stories that'll make your jaw drop. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button, because today's story is absolutely wild. We're talking about HOA corruption, illegal foreclosures, and the kind of legal revenge that'll make your head spin. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare. Stick around until the end, because the plot twists in this story just keep coming. Trust me, you do not want to miss how this ends. Now let me introduce you to Marcus. 52 years old, third-generation farmer. Here's the kicker. A licensed real estate attorney who took a break from law to run his family's farm. Remember, that detail, it becomes very important later. Marcus inherited a massive 3,500-acre farm in rural Colorado from his grandfather. This wasn't just any property. We're talking about prime agricultural land that had been in his family since the 80s-90s. It's cattle grazing, crop rotation, water rights. This farm was Marcus's entire life. The property was so massive that Marcus didn't even actively use all of it. About 500 acres on the eastern border had been sitting unused for decades. Just rolling hills and woodland that Marcus occasionally rode through on horseback but otherwise left untouched. Now, here's where things get interesting. About 15 years ago, Marcus started noticing construction activity on that eastern border section. Heavy machinery, foundation work, roads being paved. He drove out there and found a whole subdivision being built. We're talking 50 luxury homes, each one sitting on multi-acre lots. Marcus immediately called the county and the developers. That's when he got the shock of his life. According to county records, that land had been sold 12 years earlier to a development company called Summit Ridge Developers, LLC. The sale price? $800,000 for 500 acres of prime real estate, an absolutely insulting lowball price even back then. But here's the thing. Marcus never sold that land, never signed anything, never received a single penny. Marcus knew something was seriously wrong. He immediately pulled out his grandfather's original deed, his own inheritance documents, and every piece of property paperwork his family had. Everything showed he owned ALL 3,500 acres. No exceptions, no sales, no transfers. He went to the county recorder's office and requested copies of everything related to the supposed sale. What he found made his blood run cold. Someone had forged a quitclaim deed with Marcus's signature, transferring the 500 acres to Summit Ridge Developers. The document looked official. It had stamps, notary seals, recording numbers, everything. But Marcus Knie he never signed it. He took the document to a forensic document examiner. The analysis came back. The signature was a forgery, not even a good forgery. The handwriting analysis showed multiple inconsistencies, pressure patterns that didn't match Marcus's writing style, and pen ink that didn't exist until 3 years after the document was supposedly signed. Armed with this evidence, Marcus hired a litigation attorney and filed a lawsuit against Summit Ridge Developers, the county, and everyone involved. He demanded the deed be voided and the property returned to him. That's when the real nightmare began. The development company? Completely defunct, dissolved. The owners had taken their money and run years ago. The 50 homes had all been sold. 2 individual owners who had no idea they'd bought property based on fraudulent documents. These homeowners had formed an HOA called the Summit Ridge Property Owners Association. And when they heard Marcus was claiming their entire neighborhood was built on stolen land, they absolutely lost it. The HOA immediately went on the offensive. They filed countersuits claiming Marcus was trying to extort them, claimed he was the one committing fraud. They hired a team of attorneys and started burning through hundreds of thousands in legal fees. But here's where they made their first catastrophic mistake. Marcus's farm had a small corner, maybe 2 acres, that technically fell within the HOA's jurisdiction due to a surveying quirk when the neighborhood was platted. This happened because the forged deed had slightly different boundary descriptions than the actual property line. When the county approved the subdivision, they accidentally included this tiny parcel of Marcus's land in the HOA boundaries. Now, Marcus didn't even KNOW about this because he'd been fighting the lawsuit and dealing with his attorney. He missed several certified letters from the HOA demanding he pay HOA dues for that 2-acre parcel. Under Colorado HOA law, if you miss payments, the HOA can put a lien on your property and eventually foreclose, and that's exactly what the HOA did. The HOA filed a lien against Marcus's entire 3,000-5-100-acre farm for unpaid HOA dues of $875? Yes, you heard that right. $875 plus penalties and legal fees, totaling about $12,000. Marcus was so focused on the main lawsuit that he didn't see this coming. The HOA followed the foreclosure process, but they did it fast and they did it dirty. They published the required legal notices in an obscure weekly newspaper that Marcus didn't read. They scheduled the foreclosure auction for a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. with only the bare minimum notice required by law. And here's the absolute kicker. The HOA president, a real estate investor named Gerald Hutchins, bought Marcus's entire 3,500-acre farm at the foreclosure auction for $25,000. Let me repeat that. 3,500 acres sold for $25,000 because of $875 in HOA dues on a TWO acre. Parcel that should never have been in the HOA jurisdiction in the first place. Marcus found out when the sheriff showed up at his farmhouse with an eviction notice. Now, most people in Marcus's situation would be absolutely devastated, destroyed, ready to give up. But remember what I told you at the beginning? Just a farmer. He's a real estate attorney, and Marcus was about to go nuclear. First, Marcus immediately filed an emergency motion to set aside the foreclosure sale. He argued that the foreclosure was fundamentally illegal for multiple reasons. 1. The HOA had no legitimate jurisdiction over his property. 2. The underlying debt was fraudulent because the HOA itself was built on stolen land. 3. The notice was inadequate and designed to prevent him from defending himself. 4. The sale price was so unconscionably low it constituted equity stripping. The judge granted a temporary restraining order, stopping Gerald Hutchins from taking possession of the property while the legal issues got sorted out. But Marcus wasn't done. It's not even close. He started digging into the HOA's formation, documents, bylaws, financial records, and meeting minutes. He filed subpoenas for everything, and what he found was an absolute goldmine of evidence. Remember that forged deed that started this whole mess? Marcus discovered that 3 members of the original HOA board had worked for Summit Ridge developers when that fraud happened. They KNEW the deed was forged. They KNEW the land was stolen. They'd been covering it up for 15 years. Better, Marcus found that when the HOA foreclosed on his farm, they violated about 17 different Colorado HOA statutes. The notice was deficient. They didn't properly calculate the debt. They didn't allow him the required redemption period. They didn't follow proper auction procedures. The list went on and on. But here's where Marcus's revenge plot gets absolutely diabolical. While reviewing all the HOA documents, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. The original forged deed that transferred his 500 acres to Summit Ridge developers, it had the wrong legal description. It actually described a parcel that was shifted about 200 feet south of where the development was actually built. When the developer built the neighborhood, they built it on land that was definitely Marcus's land that had never been transferred to anyone, not even through the forged deed. The forged deed described different land that was also Marcus's property, but was still sitting empty, with no houses on it. This meant the entire Summit Ridge development, all 50 homes, was built on land that legally, clearly, and unambiguously belonged to Marcus, with zero documentation claiming otherwise. But it gets better. Marcus discovered that every single one of the 50 homeowners had title insurance. And every single title insurance policy had failed to catch this massive defect in the title chain. The title companies had been negligent, possibly grossly negligent in approving these policies. Marcus now had leverage over the title insurance companies, the HOA, and every single homeowner. He sent demand letters to all 50 homeowners and their title insurance companies with a simple message. I am the legal owner of the land your houses are built on. You are trespassing. I am willing to negotiate a resolution, but I will not be extorted, foreclosed upon, or defrauded. The panic that ensued was spectacular. Now, you'd think the HOA would back down at this point. You'd think they'd realize they were in serious legal jeopardy and try to negotiate a settlement. But remember, this HOA was run by people who'd already committed fraud and illegal foreclosure. They weren't exactly thinking clearly. Gerald Hutchins, the HOA president who'd bought Marcus's farm at the fraudulent foreclosure auction, convinced the other board members to fight back hard. They filed motions claiming Marcus was abusing the legal system. They tried to get his attorney license suspended. They organized the homeowners to file complaints with every regulatory agency they could think of. They even started a social media campaign painting Marcus as a greedy lawyer trying to steal homes from innocent families. They set up a GoFundMe to fund their legal battle. They got local news coverage portraying Marcus as the villain, but they made one critical mistake. They refused to return Marcus's farm. Gerald Hutchins was convinced he'd won. He actually started making plans to develop Marcus's 3,000-acre farm into another massive subdivision. He met with investors, architects, and engineers. He was preparing to make millions. That's when Marcus dropped the hammer. Marcus filed a comprehensive lawsuit that was an absolute masterpiece of legal strategy. The defendants included the HOA, all 7 board members personally, Gerald Hutchins, the original developers, the county, every homeowner in the subdivision, and 6 title insurance companies. The claims included fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, conversion, unjust enrichment, declaratory judgment on property ownership, quiet title action, and about 20 other causes of action. Marcus was seeking actual damages, punitive damages, attorney's fees, and here's the big one, an order requiring the removal of all structures from his property. That's right. Marcus was asking the court to force the demolition of all 50 homes unless a settlement was reached. The title insurance companies saw the writing on the wall immediately. They knew they were going to lose. They knew they'd have to pay out massive claims. And they knew it would be far cheaper to settle with Marcus than to defend the lawsuits and pay out 50 separate title insurance claims. Within 6 weeks, all 6 title insurance companies had settled with Marcus for a combined total of $18.7 million. In exchange, Marcus agreed not to pursue claims against the homeowners themselves and would negotiate a resolution that let them keep their homes. But Marcus still had the HOA and its board members in his crosshairs. The court quickly ruled that the HOA's foreclosure of Marcus's farm was void. It's not just voidable void, meaning it never legally happened. The sale to Gerald Hutchins was nullified, and Marcus's ownership of his 3,500-acre farm was confirmed. Gerald Hutchins lost his $25,000 purchase price and faced personal liability for trying to profit from what the judge called one of the most egregious cases of overreach and bad faith I've seen in 20 years on the bench. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just getting his farm back. Remember, HOA had tried to steal his family's legacy property over $875 in dues that should never have existed in the first place. Marcus wanted justice, and he was about to get it in the most ironic way possible. Here's where Marcus's revenge becomes absolutely poetic. Remember how Marcus's property had that 2-acre corner that accidentally fell within the HOA boundaries because of the forged deed? Well, Marcus did some additional title research and made an incredible discovery. When the subdivision was platted and the HOA was formed, the developers had designated certain common areas for the HOA parks. Walking trails, a community center, things like that. These common areas were supposed to be owned by the HOA collectively, but the developers had screwed up the paperwork. The common areas were never properly transferred to the HOA. According to county records, they were still owned by Summit Ridge Developers LLC, which had been dissolved. Under Colorado law, when a dissolved LLC has no remaining members or managers and owns property, that property can escheat to the state OR, be claimed by adjacent property owners under certain circumstances. Marcus filed a claim for adverse possession and abandonment of the common areas. Since Summit Ridge developers no longer existed and hadn't paid property taxes on those parcels in over a decade, Marcus successfully gained ownership of approximately 42 acres of what the HOA thought was their common land. This included the community center building, 2 parks, the main entrance monuments, the roads leading into the subdivision. Now Marcus owned the access roads to the entire Summit Ridge subdivision. And under Colorado law, as a private property owner, he had the right to control who used his private roads. Marcus sent a notice to the HOA and all 50 homeowners. They were now using HIS private roads to access their properties. He was willing to grant them an easement, but he required payment for this easement. The cost? $2,000 per home per year, plus a one-time initiation fee of $10,000 per home. That's $100,000 per year. In total, plus $500,000 in initiation fees, the HOA exploded. They claimed Marcus couldn't do this. They filed emergency motions. They argued it was extortion, that he was holding them hostage, that this was illegal. The court disagreed. Marcus owned the roads. He had the right to charge for their use. The fees were high, but not legally unconscionable. And given that the HOA had tried to steal his 3,500 Diker farm for $875, the judge noted the rough justice of the situation. But Marcus still wasn't done. Remember those HOA dues that the HOA claimed Marcus owed for that 2-acre parcel? Well, now Marcus owned 42 acres of what used to be HOA common property, which meant according to the HOA's own bylaws, the HOA owed Marcus dues for those 42 acres. Marcus calculated the dues based on the HOA's fee schedule, $600 per year per parcel. Since the common areas had been in HOA boundaries for 15 years without anyone paying dues on them, Marcus calculated the back dues owed to him by the HOA at approximately $378,000, including interest and late fees calculated using the same formula the HOA had used against him. He filed a lien against the HOA for the unpaid dues. The HOA, of course, didn't have $378,000 sitting around. They'd burned through most of their reserves fighting Marcus in court. So Marcus did exactly what the HOA had done to him. He initiated foreclosure proceedings against the HOA for unpaid dues. But here's the thing about HOAs. When an HOA fails to pay its debts, the liability can pass through to the individual homeowners. Under Colorado HOA law, homeowners can be personally liable for HOA debts under certain circumstances. Marcus wasn't foreclosing on the HOA's property. He was foreclosing on his right to collect the debt from every single homeowner, facing the prospect of personal liability for a 3-100-70-8-1000 debt, plus the annual easement fees for the roads, plus ongoing legal fees, plus the potential for Marcus to make their lives miserable in about 17 different legal ways. The homeowners finally caved. They organized, kicked out the entire HOA board, and approached Marcus to negotiate a global settlement. The new board members were people who'd had nothing to do with the original fraud and genuinely just wanted to live in their homes in peace. Marcus negotiated in good faith. The final settlement included 1. The HOA formally acknowledged that Marcus's farm had been stolen through fraud, and that the foreclosure of his property was illegal. TWO, Gerald Hutchins, and the 3 former board members who'd known about the original fraud were forced to pay personal settlements totaling $1.2 million, to sell his home in the development. FOUR. The HOA paid Marcus $500,000 for the access easement in perpetuity with no annual fees. 5. The HOA paid Marcus an additional $200,000 for use of the common areas he now owned, which he leased back to them for $1 per year for 99 years. SIX. The HOA amended its bylaws to prevent this kind of abuse from ever happening again. 7. Every single homeowner issued a personal written apology to Marcus for what the HOA had put him through. But wait, there's more. Remember those 3 former HOA board members who'd worked for Summit Ridge developers and knew about the original fraud?
Yes.
Marcus wasn't done with them. He provided all his evidence to the Colorado Attorney General's office and the local district. Attorney. The AG launched a criminal investigation into the original fraud. 2 of the 3 board members were criminally charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and theft. They eventually pleaded guilty and received prison sentences. One got 18 months, the other got 2 years. The 3rd board member cooperated with authorities and testified against the original developers. He received probation and had to pay restitution. Gerald Hutchins was charged with corruption and theft for the foreclosure scheme. He pleaded no contest and received 3 years in prison plus 5 years probation. He was also ordered to pay Marcus $350,000 in restitution. The original developers of Summit Ridge, 2 of them fled the country and remain fugitives. One was arrested in Mexico and is fighting extradition. The others have disappeared. So let's tally up Marcus's revenge. He got his 3,500-acre farm back protected and secure. He received $18.7 million from title insurance companies. He received an additional $1.9 million in settlements from the HOA and board members. He sent multiple people to prison. He now owns and controls access to the entire Summit Ridge subdivision, effectively neutering the HOA's ability to ever threaten him again. And he established legal precedent that will protect other property owners from similar HOA abuse in Colorado. The homeowners. Most of them ended up being fine. Their title insurance covered the defects in their titles. They got to keep their homes. And with the corrupt board members gone, the HOA actually became a functional, reasonable organization. But they'll never forget what happens when you mess with the wrong farmer. This story is the ultimate example of why you should never underestimate people, and why HOA boards drunk on power always eventually face consequences. The HOA thought they were foreclosing on some ignorant farmer who'd missed some dues notices and wouldn't fight back. What they didn't know was they were attacking a real estate attorney with the knowledge, skills, and resources to utterly destroy them using their own tactics against them. Marcus turned their own playbook against them. They foreclosed on his property for minor dues. He foreclosed on their organization for major dues. They tried to use technical legal procedures to steal his land. He used technical legal procedures to take control of their entire neighborhood. This is what happens when karma meets competence. If you enjoyed this insane story of HOA revenge, make sure you're subscribed to Neighbor Wars HQ because we bring you the craziest neighborhood conflict stories every single week. We've got HOA nightmares, property line disputes, parking wars, noise complaints gone nuclear, and so much more. Hit that like button if you think Marcus's revenge was absolutely legendary. Drop a comment below telling me. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have been as ruthless, or would you have settled earlier? And if you've got your own HOA horror story, drop it in the comments. The craziest story might be featured in a future video. Check out the cards popping up on screen right now for more insane neighbor conflict stories. Trust me, you don't want to miss the one about the guy who turned his neighbor's pool into a koi pond overnight. Until next time, this is Neighbor Wars HQ reminding you, always read the fine print, never underestimate your opponents, and never mess with a lawyer's property.